Today we have two guests. One is the culture and hiring visionary who builds the team, and the other is the co-founder who turns that vision into scalable systems. Together, they run a global influencer marketing agency with a 24-person team.
Our goal was never to choose between the startup culture or the structure. The goal is to build a company that has both.
But what makes this story interesting isn't just their rapid growth. It's their philosophy on balancing extreme trust with strict accountability. It's how they transform from reviewing every piece of work to empowering a leadership team.
We believe culture doesn't just live in the values, but it also lives in the execution.
In this episode, we talk about what happens when a hire goes wrong, how to build genuine connection with a fully remote team, and why listening to team feedback is the ultimate retention strategy. Natasha and Sam, welcome to Agency Culture Conversations.
Thanks for having us, Wesley.
Yeah, pleasure is ours. So for our audience who are listening, Natasha and Sam, could you perhaps walk us through how did you started the agency journey? I would love to hear more about maybe like what you've been doing in your career, early in your career stage, and what lead you to where you are now?
Yeah, I guess I can start. So prior to starting the Virals Group, I've had over almost a decade of experience in the marketing field. I was in charge of social media. I was doing email marketing. And so I would call myself a marketing generalist. But I truly fell in love with influencer marketing when TikTok became a thing during the pandemic. I fell in love with influencer marketing because there's a lot of creative aspect to it, but there's also a lot of operational side. And so I teamed up with Sam to start the Virals Group, and he can share a little bit more about his background too.
Sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and a little bit about myself, I guess. So when we were founding this in 2022, I was actually still a sophomore in college. And, growing up in my era, 2003, I mean, influencers was kind of just growing and popping off with TikTok, especially during COVID. So I kind of knew that the influencer space, the creator economy, it would be the next big thing, especially for marketing. And Natasha is a family friend. So when we spoke, we bonded over our chat over influencer marketing, and eventually it grew out into starting an agency together, the Virals Group.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm curious, how was that conversation was like when you guys first started the company together? Was it like a family reunion and all of a sudden you guys just start talking about TikTok, or how does that come about?
It was during a family reunion. Yes. I was just hanging out with my cousins. She was there. And then, I asked her about her work. She mentioned she was in the influencer marketing field. I had done a couple of e-commerce projects as well in the past, of course, using influencers. And so I just picked her brain on it. And then from there, it just, again, spiraled out into, hey, maybe there is potential here, because especially with the TikTok boom, right? We have hundreds of thousands of new creators with hundreds of thousands of followers. They don't necessarily know how to monetize. So we saw an opportunity there when we were just having a discussion.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Natasha, I actually want to ask you the first question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but before TVG, you started working at a couple of early stage startups and a 300-person company, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so you've had a lot of experience working from the startup world to mid-market to perhaps even like enterprise company as well. So during those experiences, I'm curious, what are some of the, I guess, like leadership styles you observe? Was there a scenario that makes you say like, hey, we are definitely doing this, or we were never doing that within, like your own agency?
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, before starting the Virals Group, I had the opportunity to work into very different environments. In the beginning of my career, I worked mostly in early stage startups with less than 10 people. So everything was super scrappy. It was very chaotic and fast paced, but it was also really fun. And for my most recent corporate job, which I'm guessing will be what was my last two, I worked at a much larger company with around 300 employees. And so that had a lot more structure and the layers of approval. And I think that contrast gave me a perspective of what I want for our agency. From startups, I was working closely with the founders, and so I learned so much from them. And I realized that speed is an advantage that startups have. There is no layers of approval or chain of command, so you're able to push things quickly and innovate rapidly. And you also have to learn to be very resourceful because you don't have a big budget to work with. But I think overall, what really stood out to me is that there's a very strong ownership mentality in startups that I really, really like. So for most startup employees, you're not just doing your job, you're building something as part of a team, and you feel like your work is really meaningful because you can see your contributions translate into actual output. So there's a lot of loyalty and pride in being part of a startup. So I knew when we designed culture at TVG, we wanted our employees to also have that same feeling. So we tried our best to make their work meaningful for them too. We give them a lot of autonomy and ownership, and but at the same time, I also, saw the limitations of the startup life, right? A lot of startups lack structure and documentation, which can make it really difficult to scale. So from the larger company, I learned values like having structured approval processes, OKRs and performance reviews with clear systems for accountability. I learned, about workshops and team development, how to give critical feedback. And, I even tried, I even participated in my very first team offsite as part of that larger company. And so I really saw the pros and cons of each side. And so when we built our agency, our goal was never to choose between the startup culture or the structure. The goal is to build a company that has both. So today we try to operate with a speed and ownership of a startup, but also focusing on the systems like a larger company. Because at the end of the day, I think speed helps you grow, but structure is what allows you to sustain that growth.
Yeah, that's so cool actually that you get to see the both sides of the spectrums. Now, I'm curious on the flip side, what are some of the things that you saw from both the startup space and the other side of the story as well? Was there anything that you're like, man, this is something that I'm not a fan of, and I'm just not gonna implement that into my agency?
Yeah, of course. I think when, working in the startups, a lot of times they don't have structures or documentation in place. And so sometimes when we are starting new projects or, we're onboarding new team members, it can be very chaotic because we have to teach everything from the beginning because there was no documentation in place. So that was one of the challenges that I noticed in the startup life. And in the larger company, there's like layers of approval and chain of command. And so for me to push projects and to bring my ideas to life, it takes weeks and sometimes months to get an approval from the managers, right? And so I think there were definitely, it's very different, both environments, and that really contributed to the culture at TVG today because we were able to learn the pros and cons of each side and integrate that into our company.
Yeah, so let me ask you this then. A lot of founders say obviously culture is very important, but like when you're starting out, survival takes priority, right? Like you need to put food on the table. You need to make sure that the revenue is coming in. And I think this is the period where you mentioned earlier when we first started the company, like the speed is important. You got to make sure you move fast, making sure that we got clients coming in. So during that period for you guys, how do you prioritize making sure that the culture is taken care of, making sure that your team is taken care of when you're just a small team, just trying to get the business off the ground?
Yeah, I mean, when we were just starting out, to be honest with you, we didn't hire our first team member until I think a year and a half in. And you're absolutely right. Culture, when it was just Natasha and I, it was literally speed and also ownership. Right. And I think that really kind of set the tone for when we did do our first couple of hires, because when Natasha and I, when it was just the two of us, we never necessarily sat down and defined, values early on. This is what we want. This is what we don't want. But again, just the way that we kind of handled the pressure, that I feel like that kind of became the default culture, especially for when we grew. So by the time we did hire our first few staff members, culture, it wasn't something we had to teach. It was just something that this is how the business operates, and they just kind of found their structure within that.
Yeah. So that's so interesting, actually. So in the earliest days, you don't have any team culture, team value, that kind of stuff. And it was totally fair. I think that's what most, like, not just agency, but companies in general, they go through. Now, when you start implementing these values inside the agency, how do you come up with those values? Was it just, like from something that you Google, or do you refer that to like a person in your team, or how do you come up with those key pillars?
That's a great question. And to be honest, I do think it was just based on how we were raised, and then also a lot of trial and error, right? So again, when we started the company, Natasha and I, we like fast responses to brands, to our influencer clients, just so they, of course, know that we're on top of our stuff, especially if we're managing their campaigns, their emails. And also for like taking responsibilities when things go wrong. We also, both of us have a kind of an ownership mentality on that. We're always never afraid to take accountability when things go wrong. And if we ever said, that's not my job, we never said that. So, I mean, our team also kind of picked up from our actions as well. As for the actual values and cultures that we have today, a lot of it was implemented just again through trial and error, through hiring people, making mistakes, learning, and of course, improvising on that just to make sure that the team that we have now reflects the culture that we want long term.
Yeah, I like that. Just out of curiosity, this is for both of you guys actually. What are maybe like the top two values that you think this is the most important pillars for your agency?
Yeah, I think for me, communication is really important, right? Because we are a remote team, and so it's really difficult for us to have visibility over how our team is feeling on a day-to-day basis, on their workload and capacity. And so we try to communicate with the team really well, and we mention to them that if they have any issues, we are always open to listening and hearing from their feedback. And so that is one of the most important values that we have as a company. And second of all, I think it's the speed and of our operations. When we try new projects, we don't try to make it perfect. We let's push it out there and see what happens, because we can learn a lot from all of these different trials and errors, like Sam mentioned. And so I think our speed of operation and execution is also a really important value. But yeah, the communication aspect as well.
Yeah, and if
Yeah.
I can add one thing to that, I think one thing that we look for now is also independence, because Natasha and I, we're not micromanagers. Our philosophy is we hire from the top down. So we want people who are independent and able to kind of just get started from the beginning, because those are the people that already have, the ownership, the work ethic that we need. And then of course they can also give their advice and their 2 cents on projects that Natasha and I want to expand on.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? Throughout today's episode, I would love to deep dive a little bit about, all that stuff, accountability, speed, and also communication as well. But before we get into that, I'm curious, between you both, how do you divide the responsibility of culture, right? So I believe, if I understand correctly, Natasha, you handle a lot more on the hiring side, and Sam, you handle more on like the daily operations side. Is that how you guys usually structure as a co-founder?
Absolutely. So Natasha, she defines, what great looks like you mentioned, from a people standpoint and from a hiring standpoint. My job is more so to make sure that actually shows up in the day to day. So and we believe culture doesn't just live in the values, but it also lives in the execution. And I know a lot of teams say they value accountability and ownership, but nothing in the workflow actually enforces it. And so for us, we try and make it so every task has an owner, everything is tracked, and performance is visible. And we're able to do that because we've actually built our own internal system. It's called Creatify. And we are in a bit of a niche industry here in the talent management space, so we couldn't really find anything at the time that kind of suited our needs from an operational standpoint. So that's why we kind of built our own thing where ownership is clear, deadlines are visible, and nothing really falls through the cracks. Because I mean, at the end of the day, every value we have has to show up somewhere in our workflow, or it's not real.
Yeah, I like that. And I want to transition the topic a little bit. So, Natasha, you actually wrote the hiring playbook for your agency. And one thing you mentioned in there is you want to prioritize hiring A players and just give them that trust in general, right? Everybody wants to hire A players, right? But what specifically in that process for you to be able to identify somebody who can, like handle the environment and somebody that you would want to bring into your team?
Yeah, like you mentioned, one of my big projects this year was to write the hiring playbook for our team. And so I've been reflecting a lot on our hiring philosophies at the Virus Group. And Sam actually mentioned one of our core hiring philosophy earlier, which is hiring from the top down, right? So whenever we're building a new division or starting a new project, our goal is to hire people who are smarter and more experienced than us in that specific area. Because I think at that stage, we don't have the systems yet. So instead of trying to figure everything out ourselves, we bring in people who have already done it before. Because for the two of us, the goal is not to be the smartest person in every room. We want to fill our team with people who can actually act as our advisors. And that was actually how we approached our first few hires at the Wireless Group. From the beginning, we intentionally look for people who are specialists in their fields, people with years of experience and who could not only execute, but also help us build processes from scratch. So even throughout the interview process, we ask, what really matters to them, like if building something is something that they are very excited about, because some people are builders and some are executioners. And so we try to find builders in our first few hires. And to be honest, looking back, that decision was not easy financially. Senior talents are very expensive. And in the beginning, margins, when we're building a company, margins are already tight. So I think for the first year and a half, Sam and I didn't take any salary at all because we chose to reinvest everything back into hiring strong team members. And recently, I think as founders, we were able to connect with other founders. And one of the biggest mistakes we see them make is hiring junior talents or virtual assistants too early. In the beginning, you don't need more hands. You actually need more experience. And so our decision to hire top down paid off significantly because in the end, those early hires didn't just do the work. They actually built our workflows. They built our accountability structures and even our team culture. And many of them are still part of our leadership team today. They have been promoted and then they're now part of our leadership team. So they really understand us as founders already. They understand our philosophy. And so they're able to train new joiners the same way we would. And so accountability is not an issue when your leadership team already understand your philosophy. And yeah, I think for us, I think it comes down to this, like hire the strongest people first and because they become the foundation that everything else scales on. And yeah, but even with all of that in place, we learned the hard way that hiring top down isn't foolproof. Like you mentioned, one of the toughest hires was actually an HR manager who looked perfect on paper, but that's a story on its own, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I actually would love to dive into that story in a second. I think the audience is going to feel a lot of entertainment in that story. But let me follow up with you on something. So it's interesting that you mentioned that earlier in the company, when you guys first started the agency, you were looking for builders. And now your philosophy has been a bit transitioned into looking for somebody who's an executioner instead, right? So I'm curious, do you still have anybody in your team who you brought on initially that were a builder and now transition into an executioner?
So a lot of the hires, early hires that we have, like I mentioned, yeah, they were mostly builders, and now they're still building systems for us. As our company continues to scale, we need to, transition from like the workflows will change. When we were just a team of 5 people to a team of 10 to now like almost a team of 30, obviously in terms of like reporting, in terms of like how we structure meetings and how we handle performance reviews and task assignments, a lot of things change. And I think that's the exciting part about working in an agency. It's so fast paced. It's every thing is different. And so they're still builders now, although they're also focused on training executioners in our team. So junior team members who can continue doing the philosophy that we instilled in the team.
That's awesome. And that's the whole thing about hiring A players, right? Like they're willing to make the change. They see that, hey, the company is growing. Like I have to grow with the company or else the company will outgrow me. I'm glad to see all that is paying off for you guys. Now, I'm curious, and this is for both of you actually. Do you have a question or like one or two questions that you just love to ask in the interview? I think, Natasha, you mentioned one earlier, which is, what is your vision? What do you see yourself in the next few years? But do you have any other question that you typically like to ask in the interviews?
Sure. One of the things that we actually like to do in the interview is not a specific question, but we like to do scenario-based questions in the interview. So, of course, we have the behavioral, who are you, what's your experience? But then we'd ask them, if situation X happened with a team member, right, how would you handle it step by step? Or for example, we'd have case studies for second interviews, second round interviews. We'd maybe give them 3 or 4 scenarios, and then we'd ask them, hey, come up with a proposal or a solution for this. Because what we're trying to track at the end of the day, it's not just who are they, what's their experience. We're also trying to track what's their thought process. Because again, when we hire team members, we want to be able to trust them, and we want to be able to trust their thought process. And so we want to make sure it, of course, aligns with what we're looking for and with our values as a company.
Yeah. So on that note as well, when you come up with these scenarios to ask on these interviews, how do you come up with those scenarios? Is that like a real world scenarios that you saw somewhere perhaps in your agency journey, or how do you come up with it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. All of these scenarios are real world scenarios that have happened to Natasha, myself, and our leadership team. And so we just kind of rework it, and we try and see how other people would handle it as well.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Natasha, do you have a favorite question to ask in interviews?
No, yeah, I think Sam mentioned like what
Yeah.
what I wanted to answer as well in terms of like the case studies and scenario-based questions. I think
Yeah.
that has really helped us with the interview process.
I love that. I love that. Maybe now's a good time for you to tell us about the story about the HR manager.
Yeah, oh my gosh. So last year, we hired our first HR manager because our company was growing quickly and we needed someone to own the recruiting and people operations side of things. And our philosophy is to hire from the top down. And on paper, she was perfect. She had great communication. She was very proactive and she had 10 years of experience in the space. And so she checked every box. But a few weeks in, I started getting LinkedIn messages from candidates saying that they had interviews scheduled, but no one showed up. And at first, obviously, my first thought was maybe it was a scheduling issue because we always want to trust our team members first, right? We don't want to point fingers or blame anyone. But when a second person reached out, we looked into it more closely, and that's when we realized she had been submitting interview scorecards for interviews that never actually happened. And so that was really terrifying. And when we confronted her about this, instead of taking accountability, she gave explanations that didn't really add up. Oh, it was the internet connection issues. It was I might have mixed up candidate names and so on. And so at that point, it became really simple. For us, Sam and I sit down and had a conversation. And at the end of the day, we don't want to have to micromanage her work because we operate on trust. And she has broken hours. And so we had to make the decision to let her go. And looking back, I think there were 2 main takeaways from that experience. First is that no hiring process is perfect. You can have structured interviews, you can have scorecards, you can have references and look at their resumes and all of that. But at the end of the day, you're still making a bet on someone's character, right? And so there is no perfect answer. There is no perfect candidate. And second, I think it really reinforced something we already believed in, and is that we don't just hire for skill. We hire people we don't have to manage. In remote team, micromanagement doesn't scale. You can train someone on tools, you can train them on processes or how we do things internally, but you can't teach them to care about the company or to be honest, right? And so we have to prioritize people who have great work ethic and ownership and integrity at the company. And I think ultimately, when we're building systems and all of that, we don't want to build systems to control people. We build systems assuming that people are trustworthy. Because if you start building a company around distrust, I think you create a very heavy and toxic environment for your team members. And so instead of micromanaging more because of that experience, we actually added light accountability systems, just enough visibility to make sure that we know things are happening.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, what a story, I would say. And I think across, the agency space somewhere there, it happens to a lot of people than you can imagine, right? Especially in sales, in like customer service. Like, let me ask you this then. So basically you hire an experienced HR manager to run the interviews, right? And then you realize that candidates didn't start to messaging you on LinkedIn because the HR manager didn't show up. So walk me through that moment, right? Like what was going on through your head when that happened?
Yeah, again, I think my first thought when I first received that first LinkedIn DM, it wasn't to immediately blame or the HR manager, because I think the first thing is to see what's happening. And so we had a conversation with her. We said, hey, one of the candidates mentioned that they were unable to get an interview because nobody showed up. And so we tried to listen to her and understand her reasoning and why that happened. I think the first step is to see what went wrong and understand the situation and get more context and clarity on the situation. But so she obviously gave explanation that didn't really add up now that I think of when I look back. But at the time we took it at face value. But when the second person showed up on my LinkedIn DM, that's when I knew it was serious. And so it was a very eye-opening experience. I've never had that issues with our previous hires. And so we really had to learn from the beginning how to handle this stuff. And I remember talking to one of my friends who's also a founder. I asked her for advice, like, what do I do in this situation? Because, I want to believe her, but at the same time, the facts are not adding up. And so, we had to have that difficult conversation with the HR manager. I had to have a sit down with Sam to discuss like next steps and what we need to do to resolve that situation. So we had to go back and look at all of the interviews that were done by her. We had to review and fact check all of the scorecards. And I even had to personally emails all of the candidates just to make sure that they were interviewed. So there were a lot of things that we had to fix, but that was a learning experience from us. And again, like I said, I think the main takeaway is that there's no perfect hiring. You're making a bet on someone's character. And so it's a gamble.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is why I love the fact that you guys always have like a feedback loop process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Always improving your interview process, because one bad hire can actually screw up a lot of things in the internal operations.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, on that note as well, because I think throughout the podcast so far, you mentioned a lot about trust and hiring. Somebody can be a little bit more hand off, and you can be, like completely put that, like ownership on that person. So I'm sure that the situation was traumatic, but like, how did that change in terms of the way you run things? Like, did that change your mindset at all? Like, did you, had ever thought to yourself, like, maybe we should go back to micromanaging, or did you build like a better system to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. I will say it was very eye-opening, right? Because blind trust, we can't just trust staff blindly. And at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think it was like trust was one thing, sure, but it on our end, it was kind of a visibility issue as well. Again, HR was a new kind of division for us. Natasha and I were first-time owners, and we just delegated something that was important, but we just assumed that everything was working because of, again, her background, her experience, her resume. And we also, we want to trust our team, right? We hire smart people. We don't want to micromanage, but again, with HR being new to us, we weren't really sure how to go about it. We also had to lean on this HR manager for her expertise. But after that situation happened, we thought about it going back to micromanaging. But instead of that, we actually just focused more on building more visibility, like tracking meetings, clear ownership, and of course making sure nothing critical sits in a black box, not just for HR, but now for our entire process and all of our departments. So we have internal tools for the operations. We now have an HR dashboard as well to track all the candidates, and just have accountability there. And so, we just removed the blind spots from our operations, I would say.
Yeah. And actually, I want to deep dive into that a little bit, because a lot of founders want to trust their team. A lot of founders want to be kind to their team, but that in turn could backfire sometimes because of accountability, right? So managing that trust and accountability is probably one of the hardest things as a business owner, right? And you mentioned a bit about dashboard and tracking data. Talk to us a little bit about maybe some tips or tricks that you do to be able to make sure you can balance the accountability versus trusting your team completely.
Sure. Absolutely. When you scale your team, obviously as a founder, you're not going to be able to be in the day-to-day operations with everything. So kind of the system that we use is we try and look at the results more so than the actual, are you taking every single call or how many calls are you taking? So for example, for our acquisition department, we don't necessarily track how many calls are on your calendar each week. We track how many calls convert and how many creators join our roster at the end of the month, for example. And kind of what that does is the results. I mean, you need effort to get to those results, right? So if the team member is slacking or if they need some support, they're going to be forced to either step it up or to communicate with you any issues that they're having in order to hit that result at the end. And so, yeah, I mean, we try again not to micromanage the actual workload and the actual day-to-day tasks of our team members. We just take a high-level overview now, look at the KPIs, the results, and where we exactly need to step in if we do.
Yeah, numbers don't lie, right? People
Numbers
could,
don't
but
lie. There
numbers
you go.
don't. Yeah. And I bet that was something that you learned, right, Natasha, from going from startup to bigger corporations? Because from my experience as well, like startups, they never talk about KPI, but I think when you transition into into bigger company, this is where KPIs get into handy.
Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I want to transition into, and this is something that you mentioned earlier, Natasha, about delegation, is difficult, right? So
hmm
in the beginning, I imagine you review a lot of work, and now that you have the leadership team and you have A players that can handle most of the operation, what was the hardest part from just take a step back and
hmm
just approving things, maybe overseeing things rather than actually doing the work itself?
Yeah, I think for me the hardest part was definitely mental. Right in the beginning, we were involved in everything. We knew every client, we reviewed every project, we sat in every meeting, and we made a lot of the decisions together. And that gives you a sense of control, especially when you're building something from the ground up. It's your baby. But as the company grows, obviously you can't keep treating it like a baby. So not only do we have to let go, we also had to change the way we think. And that means like sometimes you have to accept that things won't be done exactly how you would do them, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. And I think that was like the biggest mindset shift for us. Just like raising a child, you want to build something that can eventually operate and grow on its own, even without you. And so now our role is a bit different. It's less about doing the work and it's more about setting the direction and building the right team and trusting them to execute. And so mostly it was just a mindset shift that was happening there.
Yeah, yeah. So let me ask you a few follow-up questions. So the first one is you like to hire A players, right? And I think that is something obviously a lot of founders want as well. And I think a lot of the time what they get it wrong is they hire A players, they expect them to know everything, and they just say, good luck, have fun, right? So you talk a bit about nurturing the talents, treating them like a
hmm
baby. So even when you hire A players, like how do you go about training the employee to make sure that they can actually perform in the day to day?
Yeah, I think that's goes back to one of our biggest values in which is communication, right? We are very proactive at communicating with our leadership team. We clearly communicate the reason why we make certain decisions. So as we are preparing them to take on leadership roles, we clearly outline whenever we make a decision, we clearly outline why we made the decision and the reasoning behind it. So they understand our thought process as well, because they obviously can't read your mind. So you have to translate everything into words for them so they understand. For example, if we choose to sunset a certain project, why did we do this? What's the reasoning behind it? If we choose to set aside more budget towards this particular task, why did we do it? And so I think clearly outlining your thought process is very important, because then the leadership team understands how you made the decision, so that in the future, when they're making the decision, they can reference back to those things that you shared with them.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever a situation where you spend a lot of time and energy into training somebody just to watch them leave?
Fortunately, no. Our team members have been with us for quite some time now, and hopefully they're happy. And so we haven't had that situation yet come up yet.
Yeah. I would say I think we're still a bit too young of a company for that to happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but obviously, hopefully not.
But I think that's a clear sign that you guys
hmm
are doing something right with the culture. right?
Yeah, but
Um,
even if that situation ever comes up where we spend so much time building resources and that employee ends up leaving, these documentations stay with the company forever, right? So you can always share them with the future hires. So you don't really have to repeat the work. It's just giving it to a different person.
right. So in terms of delegations and in terms of essentially tracking the team members' performance, I'm curious now that you have 24 employees, correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
you obviously cannot see everything, what everybody's doing, right? So in terms of tracking the numbers like scorecard, is there any specific criteria that keep you in the loop how your team is doing without having to constantly looking over the shoulders?
Yeah, absolutely. So the structure that we use OKR systems, so objective and key results for each person and for each role. Of course, it's different. But obviously, as the team grows, we've already hired like a middle management and a leadership team to oversee each department's goals and each individual's performance. Because I mean, you are right. Once the team grows, you can't be in everything. So we don't try and, track all the work. Again, we try and just track the right signals, the high level overview. So each role does have a small set of KPIs. Usually it's 3 to 5 for the quarter. And so it's very clear on what good looks like from an individual performance perspective, and if they're a leader, from what we want their team to do. And then, of course, we as in Natasha and I, we focus on the leading indicators, things like, responsiveness, conversions, and then, for example, for our talent managers, deal frequency, how often are they bringing in partnerships, of course, for the agency. And that usually tells us early if something is off, right? Because with those KPIs, that usually rolls up to the middle managers, then that rolls up to the leadership team. So Natasha and I, we aren't managing individuals anymore. We're just looking at how each function, I guess, is performing at a high level. And again, with our A players, if the signals are good, we usually stay out of the way. We trust our team. But if not, we know exactly where we need to step in.
Yeah. So what are some of the most important KPIs that you guys are tracking, right? So let's talk about sales, let's talk about marketing, let's talk about internal operations, fulfillment, and perhaps a little bit into hiring as well. What are some of the numbers that you want to see on a very high level?
Absolutely. So what one goal that I think we have for our acquisition department, for example, the acquisition department, their job is to recruit new influencers to join the Viralist group on an exclusive basis. Right now, we're at about 120 exclusive creators. We'd like to be somewhere at around 200 at the end of the year. And so obviously quarter by quarter, we break that down. Q1, this is the numbers that we want you to be at. Q2, this is where we want you to be at, all the way up until Q4, just so we can track, make sure everything is still on track. Acquisition is one. Another one is, I guess, again, the talent management. These guys are the ones that manage the creators, manage the brand sponsorships and the brand relationships. We, of course, have a specific number of deals that we want them to bring in, a certain revenue amount that we want them to bring in. And then again, if things aren't working, for example, if a talent manager is behind on their goals, we now know, okay, is it your roster? Do we need to change up, the team that you're managing? Do we need to hand off more campaigns to you from our inbounds? And so again, every individual and every team is different, but we of course try and manage it in a way that's fair for them and that keeps the company moving forward.
Yeah, I like that. Now, I want to transition the topic and talk a little bit about expectations for your team. So we're a little bit on that as well. Obviously, in the beginning, you guys are always in that grinding mindset, right? The founder mentalities where speed is important. We got to make sure that this is our advantage. And I remember, if I remember correctly, at some point, you guys even don't take the pay cut just to make sure that the business is moving forward. So as you build out that leadership team, do you have the same or similar expectations for your team?
With the leadership team, we definitely have higher expectations just because at the end of the day, I mean, the leadership team and their work, it doesn't just affect individual performance, right? It affects the entire team. So how do we manage those expectations, especially within the leadership team? It's very clear communication, very clear with clarity and with alignment and with how they're feeling. Because we want to be very clear basically with what they own, what they don't own, and what success looks like in their role. Because again, leaders, they're responsible not just for their own work, but for their team's performance as well. And so we try and stay close to how they're feeling, what the workload looks like, and of course, whether or not they need any more support. Natasha and I are always happy to step in and help however we can. And that clarity that gives them more autonomy, which I also think helps prevent burnout in the long term.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting topic actually. Let's talk a bit about burnout. So
Yeah.
do you, now, obviously, when you operate as a very high speed mentality, right? And as an agency, that's something that you just gonna have to do. So how do you make sure that your leaders and also your team members are not burning out while moving in such like a rapid direction?
Sure, I can give my thoughts on this, and Natasha, if you have any thoughts, feel free to add on. But for what we noticed kind of building the company over the past few years is that burnout doesn't necessarily come from workload. It really comes from lack of clarity, and it comes from lack of direction, which is why we really emphasize, being clear with our team, with our expectations, and with what success looks like. Because if they know what they're working towards, and if they know the impact that they're making on the business, usually they're more motivated, right? And then they're less likely to burn out. And so again, as leaders, we train our A players, and Natasha and I are learning this as well. We want to be more clear with our communication, and we want to make sure that the team is always aligned with each task.
Yeah, and I think adding on to Sam's point, we don't see burnout as like a bad thing where we have to reprimand our team members for having burnouts. We actually have mentioned this during their orientation when they join our company, that it's okay to feel burnt out from time to time. It's a normal feeling, especially since, we're dealing with a lot of campaigns every month. We have a very fast-paced environment, and so it's normal for people to feel burnt out. But it's very important to communicate that early to us, to your direct manager, and if it requires further escalation to both Sam and I. So we always emphasize to our team members that it's okay to feel burnt out, but it's not okay to keep quiet about it. So talk to the team so we can support you, because if we don't know that you're feeling burnt out, then there's no way for us to support you, right? We've had instances of team members coming to us saying, hey, I'm feeling very overwhelmed because I have to deal with personal health issues or family issues. And we're always happy to help. If that means delegating some of their tasks to other team members or stepping in when needed, like, we're always happy to do that, but we can't do that when communication is not there.
I would love to ask you guys a personal question, if you don't mind. When was the last time you both got burned out?
That's a great question, Leslie. I think for me, it was, at the end of last year, I was really burnt out because there were so many projects going on at the time. Q4 is the busiest time for agencies, especially in the marketing field, right? And so I was dealing through a lot. But I think the best part of having a co-founder is like when someone needs to take a step back, someone can, step up. And so I was able to go on a vacation end of last year, which really helped a lot. But yeah.
I guess for mine, I'm going to be completely honest with you, Wesley. I don't really remember the last time I was burnt out. I was just always just kind of at my computer, just typing away at something.
Did you play a lot of video games growing up, Sam?
I did growing up. I had to stop, of course, with wireless group. It took up a lot of time, especially in the beginning. But I mean, I love what I do. I think the wireless group, it's a fun industry to be in. To be honest with you, it doesn't really feel like work every day.
And actually, speaking of games, I remember a funny story from our first year of operations when it was just Sam and I. It was like very busy. We were handling everything ourselves, like our projects, all of the clients, and it was really stressful. I think we were working hundreds of hours per week. And so Sam and I decided, you know what, let's invest in a Nintendo Switch for both of us. And so when we first made our real good income from TVG, we actually bought Nintendo Switch for both of us so that we can also play games once in a while to take some of the stress off.
That's awesome. I know a lot of founders, when they first start making that money coming in, they go out and they buy, like watches and cars and houses. But for you guys, it's the Nintendo Switch. Everything is an ROI, right? That used in ROI.
Exactly.
But yeah, any others like things that you guys do just to help with burnout? I know you mentioned a lot about having a clarity is something that helps going on vacations. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious, well, any other interesting point of running the business that you felt burnout and you think something that helped you?
I guess to add on to to reemphasize Natasha's point, actually having a co-founder is like having a great support system kind of in the business world. And I think it's the best decision that any founder can make, honestly, having a good co-founder, because every person I think has strengths and weaknesses. And if you find a co-founder that can complement your skill set, and you can also step in when they're out and they can step in when you're out, it really takes a lot of burden off of you as an individual founder, because running a business is not easy, right? There's a lot of variables, a lot of things that don't go right. And so having someone just to have as a soundboard, to have as a support system, and to have as, you know, someone you can rely on when you're not feeling 100%, I think that is probably one of the best decisions any founder could make.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Do you think now if you both were to go on vacation or something like that, do you think your leadership team can actually take over and be in charge of what you guys are doing?
We thought about actually doing that and then seeing just what happens with the team.
Yeah, we are approaching our fourth year in business, and this year was truly a year where our team really stepped up. And so we actually joked about it the other day. What if we take like a month-long sabbatical where we actually go out of office and see what happens and not check any of our messages or emails and see if the company is running. It is yeah, we're still talking about it, but it might happen this year.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. I actually want to talk a little bit about communication. And I feel this is something that you guys are very passionate about as you guys are talking through the episode. So you have 24 employees, mostly offshore. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, you also do in-person meetings and annual retreat as well. So for everyone who's not doing that, right, maybe they think offshore such as a waste of time or like retreats such as not productive. What have you seen in terms of ROI of investing, that much time and money into meeting face to face?
Listen, honestly, meeting face to face with our team has been one of the highest ROI things that we do. I mean, so every year, just for context, we do take our team out on retreats. Like, for example, last year we all went to Singapore. The year prior was Bali. This year, who knows where we're going? And oftentimes we hire a lot from the Philippines. Our team in the Philippines like to gather for co-working sessions as well. We sponsor them, of course. And you're right. I mean, on paper, it looks expensive. There is no clear ROI and it's not directly tied to revenue, but especially as your team scales, the trust and the connection you build within the team culture, I mean, it translates into way better communication, into less friction, which means faster execution. And I mean, it builds better connections with yourself and the team within the team, and overall just increases company loyalty. Especially for us, because at the end of the day, we are a relationship-based business, right? We are people-dependent. We are an agency. So the tighter the relationship internally, the less friction, the more efficient we can be. And I think, honestly, a week in person or a couple of days even for a retreat, it saves months of friction remotely.
Yeah, and you're right. I honestly think maybe that the communication, that connection that you guys have with your team face to face, and that's the reason why you don't have the issue where you train
Yeah.
somebody for so long and then
Mhm.
they leave the company, right?
Yeah,
Awesome.
for sure.
And yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but you recently implemented health insurance for your company too, right?
Yeah.
That's so cool. Can you walk us through why you made that decisions and why that became one of your benefits?
Yeah, so one of our team members voiced a concern a few weeks ago saying, that there is no health insurance in the team. And so now we are implementing it quickly. Healthcare is now being implemented next month. And to be honest, it was a pretty fast decision, but it wasn't something that came out of nowhere. It had already been in the back of our minds from the very beginning. I think when we sat down and we talked about budgets for payrolls and compensation, we always want to be able to offer competitive packages for our team. Because at the end of the day, if we want to hire A players, we also have to be able to offer them competitive packages, right? And so it was definitely a topic that Sam and I discussed from time to time. But in the early stages, you're constantly having to make trade-offs. Like we had to choose and prioritize things like compensation and growing out the team, which meant we had to hold off on benefits like healthcare for a while. And so when one of our employees came up with this concern, it wasn't a surprise. It was more like, oh, this is finally the moment where we really needed to push and finally act on it. Because if healthcare is important enough for one person to consider leaving, then it's probably important for many others as well. And so we made the decision to move forward, and as soon as possible too, because we want our team members to understand and to know that they are being heard. We might have a big team now, but every single one of them, if there's any concern and we can address it early, then we want them to know that they are being heard.
Yeah, I love the thought process that, if this is concern for one team members, then it must be a concern for at least 2 or 3 more people that they might not have had the courage to speak up. So walk us through whenever you guys want to implement maybe like a new team benefits like PTO or health insurance. What does that process look like? Do you have to look into your internal operations, your payroll, your numbers before getting that roll out? Or like how does that process look like for you guys?
Yeah, so we have a meeting where we discuss like our budgets and like what we can reasonably allocate towards, like, for example, healthcare and other benefits. And first of all, I think budget discussion is really important, especially as founders. You're in charge of taking care of to make sure that the company is healthy, because that is your responsibility for your team. And so we did have a sit down where we discussed budget, and then we reviewed all options. We also talked to the team if they have any suggestions, for example, of healthcare providers that they liked or healthcare providers from their previous agencies or workplace. And so we were able to gather all of the feedback and input. We did intro calls to a couple of different providers, and that was how we were able to make that decision.
Yeah, I like that. Have you had a situation where you just had to say no to the team? Somebody brought up something that they wanted to implement and you're just like, no, I can't, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges we faced, and something that we can't fix immediately, is around growth opportunities. That was like a very heavy topic last year, and we had to say no to a couple team members. So as you're aware, we've built a team of very strong A players, right? And naturally, as people stay with the company longer, they want to take on more responsibilities and move up the corporate ladder. And unfortunately, in a small company like ours, there aren't always open roles that are they're above them, right? So you end up in a situation where you have a lot of A players who are ready to grow, but there isn't always a clear next position available yet. And that is something that we can't solve instantly. And so we had to say no to a couple of people last year when we were doing compensation reviews and performance reviews. A lot of people were asking for promotions, but we don't have those open roles available. And so, but I think the way we handled that was just by being very transparent to the team. We were very honest, and we told them, like, hey, we see your ownership and we see your hard work and we value it, but we don't have an open role right now. But it's not a no forever. We're working on it. And so we try to give them as much visibility as possible to what we're building towards. We tell them these are all the goals that we want to achieve next year and in the upcoming quarters. And so hopefully, if things go well and all of these campaigns and projects roll out effectively, then we might have open positions where you can grow into. And I think at the same time, we also don't see growth to be limited only to titles, right? We also encourage our team to take initiative when they can. So if someone has an idea or a project that they want to lead, we're very open to that. So a good example of this is actually our current marketing lead. So before she was a marketing lead, she was our campaign manager, and she really wanted to grow more. She wanted to lead, to own an area that she's very passionate about and handle more than just campaigns. And so she proposed the idea of us investing more on marketing. And so we piloted for a few months. We see the results, and now we have a marketing position that's open. And so I think when people step up and they propose projects and create opportunities for themselves, they often end up shaping their own roles over time. And so I think what we always emphasize to our team is not every no is permanent. Sometimes it just means like not yet, but we're working on it, and here's how you can grow in the meantime. And if you have any ideas, let us know.
How do you make sure that people believe in your vision? Because I can imagine, like, if somebody was to bring up conversation of, hey, I want to get promoted, and you tell them like, hey, there's no availability yet. How do you make sure that they believe in there is a growth in the company that at some
Yeah.
point they would be
Hmm.
able to move toward that position?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think build is built over time, right? And so when we say something, we actually have to do it and we have to prove that to them that we listen. And I think we have proven ourselves and we have a track record of like listening to our team members and implementing it as we go. Like for example, with the marketing lead position that we opened up because our team proposed it, the health insurance that we implemented because our team asked for it. And so I think we build trust is built through your execution as well. And because we consistently prove to our team that we're taking action when we say we will, I think that really helped a lot.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, unfortunately, we are getting to the end. And before you guys go, I would love to ask you both individually a simple question that I'd like to ask our guests. But let's say if you have to restart, I would say, the agency today and just have to build the agency from scratch, what is the number one mistake you would refuse to repeat yourself?
That's a good question. For me personally, for mine, I wouldn't scale anything I think that isn't already working cleanly. Because I mean, in the beginning, when you're small, processes are messy, you're not making too much revenue yet, you can get away with messy processes because again, you're small. Things live in people's head. Ownership isn't clear. And if things go wrong, you can fix it pretty quickly. But once you grow, once you scale your team and your company, I mean, those gaps, if you scale with those gaps existing, I mean, those gaps don't stay small. You're scaling the business, but you're also scaling the problems, the miscommunications, the unclear accountability. All of it eventually is going to compound. So the rule, I mean, for me, I think is pretty simple. If it's not clean, then we don't scale it. We fix it first, and then we grow. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, I guess learning to let go earlier. I think when we were first starting out, I was really focused on trying to be involved in every single project. And it's just, I think that was also part of the reason why it led to my burnout. And so I think learning to delegate and trust our team earlier on is an important lesson, I think.
Well, everyone, this is your guest, Natasha and Sam, and this is the Agency Culture Conversations. Thank you guys for being on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for having us, Wesley.